One member joined, he liquidated his 401k, sold his home, had the bank come up with all the money in cash and donated it all to her. People just giving up their lives to join the team. When they started to either realize this was a delusional place and that things didn't add up, most people would pack up and leave. But because I had a relationship with her and I actually grew to care about her very much, I didn't leave right away because I was trying to help her. And I stayed, and part of me was fighting against the mother god persona, and part of me was supporting Amy Carlson. I was trying to snap her out of it. I almost had her a couple times. She admitted she wasn't mother god, and I thought I was going to be able to save her and end this all, end the delusion. And she decided a couple weeks later to leave the cult and follow me across the country. This isn't known by many people, and she left the cult behind. To say that I'm past it would be a lie. I get angry when I think about it. Her withering away for months on end and nobody getting her help. The girls on YouTube even bragged on a YouTube video about how she had a moment where she asked for help and they told her, no, your mother god, we can't take you to a hospital. We're not taking you to a doctor. They bragged about a moment when she said, what if I just made this all up? What if I am crazy? Finally, she was breaking through it, begging. This is Amy coming out, begging for help. And they tell her, no, you're mother god. This is nonsense. Don't believe it. And they just spin her right back into the delusion. And they don't want to hear it. And she withers away and dies.
Let's lay the groundwork first and talk about Love Has Won, which is often described as a cult nowadays. Before we dive into how it operated, how it recruited members, and the influence it had and maybe still has, let's start with the most basic question. In your words, what is Love Has Won?
Wow. I've never had to answer that question really, so pointedly. Love Has Won is a community of people who came together with intentions of helping to create a better world and those intentions were a little misplaced and misguided and taken advantage of. Their goodness was abused, turned, and twisted by the intentions of people who were more interested in control and power than they were in truth and awakening and empowering other people as they promised those who joined them in the first place. And through the delusions of the titles of names like Mother God, archangels, and other illusory ideas, it created this inevitable downward spiral that led to lies, to covering up truths, to all kinds of dark and insidious pretenses that inevitably turned into something that was not positive, but a very, negative and harmful experience. And Love Has Won became a cult in the end because it was something that served a person rather than a message, as was the intention.
What changed?
It's a great question. And there were a lot of little things in my time that I watched. But eventually, the realization that there was a lot of delusion involved as far as the titles, the names, such as Mother God, considering herself to be God, saying she had lived 19 billion years or that she had 534 past lives. that she was perfect, that she was egoless. Eventually, the realization in the moments of truth that she began to see that these things were delusions, and the running from the truth and the attempts to hide it, and the lengths that she and others had to go in order to pretend like they didn't see the truth, caused them to begin to act in ways that were antithetical to their original intentions of serving all of humanity with this positive awakening of love and light. So with the intention of trying to cover up the fact that they were delusional in so many ways, that led to them having to, for a lack of better terms, turn to the dark side. And it became something much darker than anybody ever wanted it to be or anticipated it would become.
You said that the original community came together to try to create a better world. And that was the intention.
It was.
So love has won. The idea, I believe, was that love was a concept that needed to be spread. And that community would do that. And I believe the founder, Amy Carlson, she started Love Has Won in 2014. And she gained her first follower, which I believe his name was Miguel Lamboy.
Correct.
Yeah, so he was the first one. They started with... Okay, so let me start with this question. Do you believe that Amy's intention then was pure and good, that aimed at spreading the love at that moment? So do you believe her intentions were pure in the beginning?
I do, and this is something that I looked for and I watched for very closely. Out of the corner of my eye, I was next to her all day, every day. And this is something that I looked for. And she was a true believer, at least for a time. And we can get into that. I was with them for 10 months, but eventually the cracks started to form. And when they did, I wasn't shy about bringing them up. And that is when the fork in the road showed up, when it was like, the truth is here. I can show it to you. I've proven it. Which way do you choose to go? And that's when you could see the decisions begin to be made to go in a direction of other than accepting the truth. Because the delusion, the mother God persona, as I call it, this shell that was a protection, a protective mechanism for Amy Carlson, who didn't want to deal with past life trauma. So she used this title almost as a means of a defense mechanism. So rather than having to face it, she made conscious decisions to go down this road of choosing the delusions. And so while she started with pure intentions, and I believe that 100%, eventually enough cracks formed where it came to a point where it was clear that she was choosing the lies and the distortions over the truth and honesty.
Let's go to your story, because you, I believe, came into contact with her in 2015 or 2016, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Actually, I came into contact with her late in 2014.
2014. Okay, so shortly after Love Has Won was formed, earlier that year.
Correct. It had gone by a different name, but it was the same. It went by First Contact Ground Crew Team. She had been with Miguel Lamboy, or Michael, for about a year and a half before I met her in November of 2014. At that time, there were another 5 gentlemen living in the house with her. But it eventually became known as Love Has Won. It just, had a couple different rebrandings, I guess you could say, over the years.
Yeah. How did you get into contact with her? How did that start?
Through searching online. I was in a place where I was seeking spiritually, looking for answers to questions that I had about the meaning of life, my purpose, spiritual questions. And I had found her website that they ran. They used to aggregate content from across the web and post it all in one place. So I didn't have to go to all these different websites to find the articles I wanted to read on a daily basis. And then I realized that they had a chat room in the top right-hand corner. It said, join us in our chat room. Come talk to us. And I joined, and, there would be 20, 30 people, and they're all discussing the kind of topics that I was interested in hearing. Everybody talking about their own baggage, trying to figure out, why they can't get past these feelings, these emotions, how to become a better person. And it really struck me and stuck with me. And it felt like I had found a community of people that, I resonated with, and I stuck around. And that's how I initially found them, was through the chat room. And that's how most, if not all, of the members that ever joined the team started as chat room members.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm really interested in why you got into contact and why you went to that website, because I think this is a very important thing that's going on right now in society, right? People are trying to look for meaning, for example. So they will come to places where they have the feeling that they will achieve a form of meaning in their life, which is a very deep yearning that I think is very human in everybody.
Yeah.
Well, everybody on earth. So if I and let me know if this question goes too far, that's perfectly fine. But what specifically was it with you that you were looking for that? And the reason why I'm asking that is more like a tactical question, because the underlying, pretty much the reason why I'm curious to your answer is because it suggests what kind of people, and maybe that's not the right way to look at it, but it suggests a potential pathway to these kinds of organizations that are good to be aware of. So the question in essence is, in what position of life were you back then in 2013, 2014, right before you got into contact with Amy?
Yeah, good question. So, I think you'll find a lot of similarities between my answer and what you would find if you asked other members.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a place where I had been working a corporate job, didn't really love it, made good money, my bills were paid, but I wasn't happy. I was content, but not happy. My dad was proud of me. The world said I was doing everything right, but I wasn't happy. And it made me feel like something was wrong, that there was something missing from my life. And yes, I wanted to find meaning and I wanted to find purpose. I was also interested in conspiracy theories. And I bring this up because this is an important hook for the cults, is the conspiracy theories are a big hook, and you find them among a lot of the cults are into conspiracy theories, because when people are feeling that they're looking for purpose and that they don't feel they're getting it from their lives, the conspiracy theories are kind of like showing them as an example that something isn't right with the, quote, normal world, and that these conspiracies, there's something to them. There's what's really going on in the world. We're being lied to.
Yeah.
That's why I don't feel fulfilled. So these cults use the conspiracy theories as hooks to attract members and say, look, we have the answers to not just these conspiracy theories, but to why life doesn't feel fulfilling for you, why you don't feel fulfilled in your purpose, and you don't feel like you have meaning. And the conspiracy theories play a big part in that, because people see those and they're kind of like evidence or proof that, things aren't as they seem. And people want to find a community where other people are looking at life in the same ways that they are. And between not being fulfilled with my corporate job, being in a place where I had just overcome addiction, which I had been fighting, and that gave me a newfound sense of wanting to, expand my horizons. I felt free of my addiction. I wanted to find even more purpose to my life. And I had the time to do so. All of these things came together and created what is like a perfect storm for me to be susceptible, if you would say that, you use that word, susceptible to joining one of these high control groups that seemed like a positive community on the front end, but turned into something
Right.
that was a high control group
Yeah.
when you got there. Yeah.
And I can understand that in the moment. So back when you were back in 2013, 2014, this question will be very hard to answer. But with the gift of hindsight, what do you think was missing in your life back then that made you feel that you didn't have meaning or that there was something missing there? What do you think that was?
Love of self and comfort in my own authenticity. And those were really the two big things that I learned. Especially the authenticity was probably the biggest part. Being my authentic self and being okay with who I was is something that I learned by going through the delusions and fighting through these fake titles that we were given and living in this world of, delusions and titles and conspiracy theories, right or wrong, fighting through that is what led me to recognize that it was my own authenticity that I was really missing, and that once I had found that, I began to, accept and love myself, and that changed everything. And I think
Right.
the love of self and the authenticity were probably the two most important.
Yeah. So that's where then Amy and the other people come into, because they gave you the idea, at least at first, that you were there and that you were loved. And then as a result of that, you could also love your own self and love your own person, love your own authentic self, to use those words. So that was the attraction hook then for you.
Yes, and yeah, they essentially control your own sense of your love and say, yes, we love you. They isolate you
Right.
from the rest of the world and your family. They don't love you. That's part of their playbook. So they control your idea of love and self-love. They control your idea of authenticity, by saying, name casting, I'm Mother God, you're going to be Father God, or you're this archangel, and you're Horus, you're an important person here inside the group. Out in the real world, you're nobody. And that's where the attachment to the group really comes from, because you feel like without that group, you don't have that
You're
authenticity
nothing.
or that self-love.
Yeah. Yeah. So it becomes like a symbiotic relationship, in the sense of together you can have that, you can live together and be happy and be fulfilled, quote unquote. But if you detach for any reason, then that's over. Then that whole self is gone, pretty much.
Exactly. The control mechanisms are almost baked into the entire belief system in that way.
Have you looked into other cults in the past, and do you see that there's an overlap in these kinds of methods, let's say? And I'm asking this from a position of someone who has never engaged with such an organization myself, has never even been close to any one of them, at least not for as far as I know, and also doesn't know any people who have engaged in them. And it also feels like it's something that doesn't... Well, actually, I should be careful saying that, because what I wanted to say is that I don't even think that's something that happens in Western Europe that much, but that's very much incorrect, because I read a couple of stories over here from a couple going on. But anyway, back to your question. Do you the question is essence is, do you think that search for meaning that people have, that is a fundamental ingredient into them joining such an organization, does it automatically also mean that if that is not there, that it's very hard to capture a person within a cult like this? Would you say that's fair?
Yes, I think that's very fair. I think you also have to take into account like I had mentioned, the conspiracy theories, because
Yeah.
there's this separation between the normal world and what you think reality might really be and is being hidden from you. And within this community, you will find the answers to that. And to answer your first question is yes, they all have a lot of similarities, and it starts with isolation. And that is
Hmm.
isolating you from the outside world. Think about it. A child raised in one of these communities in a bubble, doesn't know anything else. That child, that's how, children are turning into terrorists in some parts in the world because they don't know any better. They're isolated. So the isolation is a big part that you see in all of the cults that cut you off from your family. They do something called wallet washing, which is they tell you that by, getting rid of all of your money or donating it all to the cult, that's one way to wash your sins, to wash your ego away, and to become the person that you want to be by giving up all of your money. That's another one that you will see there. So you've got the isolation, the wallet washing. Then you'll have the leaders doing things like piggybacking, which is here's an example. Amy would say, when I had my spiritual experiences that happened before I even met the team, that it was actually her, as God, her higher self, bringing me these experiences, kind of hijacking all of your spiritual experiences to kind of puff herself up as this leader. And I found through my research that that's another common tactic that these leaders have to inflate their identity. So those are a couple of the big ones: is the isolation,
Hmm.
the money, financial aspect of it, and then the leaders kind of inflating their own sense of self-importance. I find that is a very familiar thing among all cults.
Yeah, it makes very much sense because the moment that you detach people from the outside, they have no outside input anymore to verify the information that they're getting, if it's correct, yes or not. So their informational input becomes the cult itself.
Right.
They detach all their possessions, so there's nothing. There's no reason for them to I guess to buy or to sell or to go to the outside world to have any connection with others, which is I think is also what you said earlier, that Amy was already living together with five men who were members of her organization,
Correct.
right? So there's possession giving up. There is you don't get any outside information anymore, and you hijack that search for meaning.
Correct. Correct. No, they're really big ones. And then, you find yourself in a place where it's much easier to continue going along with everything that happens within the group.
Yeah.
Because one, you're isolated, and two, because nobody wants to put a target on their back. Nobody wants to be the outcast. You want to go along to get along. So again, those control mechanisms become baked into the environment and the belief system itself. And it kind of just
Yeah.
becomes like this self-fulfilling belief system and control mechanism.
Talk to me about the beginning. So you joined. Walk me through those. How did the days look? Where were you? How were the people around you? Walk me through it. Give
Yeah.
me a sense of how it was.
Sure. So, the very first day that I got there, when I walked in, the first thought I had in my mind was, oh my God, I made a terrible mistake, because I walked in and the house was a mess. And, I was expecting to go to a place, they were spiritual. They seemed like, they were very adept. I expected the house to be, very clean.
Hmm.
Just like, your house is kind of like an extension of what goes on in your mind, right? So your house is a mess. That tells me you are a mess. That scared me. It looked like a bomb had gone off, clothes everywhere. The place hadn't been cleaned in weeks. So that scared me at first. But as far as what the days were like, they were very much focused around us and our online presence and our websites and growing our reach, posting our articles, growing our followers, getting more people to come to the website, more people to come into the chat room, more people to support us. And it all turned into to get more people to donate money, to give us funds to keep going. I mean, it isn't cheap to pay for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people to live in a house. So we had to have some kind of funds coming in. So that became really important. Amy did these spiritual healing sessions where she claimed she was able to heal people of different sicknesses. At one time, I believe she claimed she was able to heal somebody with cancer. But she would, most of her healing sessions were more like, they came across more like a session with a therapist or a counselor, just talking to somebody through their own issues. But she would do that and people would donate money. And, I was the website administrator. I had a background in marketing, so I would work in our websites, upgrading them, trying to increase our following. The other team members would be assisting as well, posting articles, researching for articles, everybody chipping in as far as some would cook one night, others would cook another night. I was really the only person who cleaned very much. But other than that, we kind of found, this the way to just kind of work through every day. Everybody had their own kind of tasks and we made it work. And every day was very similar. We just focused on the websites. Amy did her spiritual healing sessions, and that was the most important thing because that's what brought in the donations and the money to keep the team going. And the more money we got, it seemed the more that she wanted, the more it became important. And, people started donating, $7,000 one time. We had one member join, he liquidated his 401k, sold his home, gave all of the money, had the bank come up with all the money in cash and donated it all to her, handed it to her, some $400,000. People just giving up their lives to join the team. And that's where every day really looked the same. We moved around a little bit, but every day was just us, working on the websites and her doing her healing sessions. They were all very similar. It was just kind of the same monotonous repetition every single day.
Okay, so let me back up just a little bit because I'm also trying to get a sense on your entrance point is pretty much. So you got into contact with her. What did you have to do, or how did you have to prove yourself, quote unquote, to be accepted within her organization? That's a less question on that front, but how did that move in work, pretty much?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, it all started with being a member in the chat room. People would join the chat room and hang out, and you'd become a regular there and get to know somebody over the course of a few weeks, hanging out on a daily basis. And
those are just random members that you talk to then?
Sure. And you could get a sense of, who felt more connected than others, who showed up more than others. And, some people would say, I feel the calling to come and join you. I'd like to join you. And at first, Amy didn't like the idea of the team growing too big. But after I had left, it became, the more the merrier, because she saw that the more people they had, the more potential money they could make. They started coming up with all these different things to sell. They were selling colloidal silver. They were making candles. They were making like necklaces and artwork. They were doing all kinds of things. But the way you proved yourself was just by believing and by going along with the belief system, by supporting the belief system, by not speaking out against it, by not being like Andrew, because I was somebody who became very outspoken against the group while I was there. And that was the big no-no for most people when they started to either realize this was a delusional place and that things didn't add up. Most people would pack up and leave. But because I had a relationship with her and I actually grew to care about her very much, I didn't leave right away because I was trying to help her. And I stayed, and part of me was fighting against the mother god persona, and part of me was supporting Amy Carlson on a daily basis. And I kind of made that difference between the two of them. And but for the most part, the way that you were accepted into the community was by believing in the belief system and help perpetuating it and spreading the message of the group, you know, as far and wide as could possibly get.
Mhm. Okay. Before we move on to Amy, let's talk about the structure of the organization, because you mentioned earlier that you all had your own tasks. So what I'm trying to get is a sense of what your hierarchy or leadership looks like. What is delegating the tasks? So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Amy was the leader. She was calling the shots when it came to, you know, any real big decision. She made the decision. There was no question she was in charge of everything.
Hmm.
Michael was her right hand man for most everything. Kind of like a little brother in a sense, but she trusted him more than everyone. But when I came in, I thought I would be somebody, just another team member in the background. And she told me that I was actually going to be the father God to her mother God. And I was in this place where I was following everything she told me because I felt she knew so much more about spirituality and finding my purpose and my meaning than I knew. And for a while, I tried to follow her, and it, you know, really never sat well with me. To make a long story short, you know, the whole becoming Father God never made sense. I didn't really buy into it. I tried for a few weeks
Hmm.
to really follow what she told me, thinking I was going to become the vessel for some cosmic, powerful being to come to the earth and help the team along and help to uplift humanity to a better place. And it didn't take long for me to put two and two together and realize that this was all quite delusional. But nevertheless, as far as a hierarchy goes, it was Mother God and then me. I was pretty much, you know, I guess you could say second in command, although I still, you know, left the decision making to her. When it came to the websites, I was in charge since I had that background. I administered them. I told other people, you know, what our plan was on a daily basis, how we were going to find and share articles, and how we were going to go about doing that. But when it came to the team and, you know, where we were going to live or how much money we were bringing in and what we were going to spend or, you know, any big decisions that were made all went through Amy. She was the leader. There was really no um, there wasn't anybody else who was putting in their people would give their opinions, but they didn't really have a say, if that makes sense.
It does. There's something interesting about the way you're telling this story, because you seem to have like an internal conflict. At least back then you had it, because to some degree you're speaking with pretty warm words about Amy herself, right? You grew to care for her, and in I believe it was your Vice interview, you also mentioned that at that time, to you, she seemed one of the most insightful people you've ever met. So those are pretty warm words for her. But at the other end of the spectrum, you were resistant to her persona, to the mother god persona, the persona that said, "I've been reincarnated 500 times, and I've been all these famous people, including Jesus Christ and Cleopatra from the past." And you were resistant to that. So, two questions there, because I'm very curious about where that care for her came from. Why do you think you started developing that care for her? And then the second question is, if everybody around you, right, was fully on board with that whole mother god idea, and you were there as well, and you were isolated from the outside world, let's say, why did you develop a resistance to it?
Yeah, great questions. So I had gotten to a place where I didn't anticipate ever being in a relationship with her. That was something that at first I was very much against. I didn't want it. You know, she had pulled me aside on my second or third day there and gave me what I call the Father God talk, telling me how I was going to be Father God. I was going to be
Hmm.
the vessel. I needed to get rid of my ego and that this consciousness would come into my body. And I didn't want anything to do with it. It felt way too heavy. I didn't understand it, but I acquiesced and I followed her advice and I went along. And eventually we you know, started a relationship, a romantic relationship. And I began to see the difference between the person that she truly was and this fake mother god persona, this shell of a persona that she seemed to hide behind. And, um, I made a difference. One person said it interestingly, he called it a coping mechanism for me, and it might have been, but I made a difference between who Amy Carlson was and who Mother God was, because there were moments where she wasn't Mother God. She was just being a regular person. Like when we woke up in the mornings and we would sit and have our coffee and just talk, have a very human, experience together. And then there were other moments with the team where, it was all about her being Mother God and, this is who I am. I have been all of these people, Cleopatra, Joan of Arc. She would tell her stories and she would tell her followers about, how she's Mother God and, essentially inflate her sense of self. And I had learned to differentiate between the two because Amy needed help. Amy was somebody who had an alcohol problem. She had a problem with drinking. She needed to be taken care of when she drank at night. She needed a babysitter, literally. I mean, she couldn't even get up out of her chair to walk without somebody, me, holding her on her hips to make sure she didn't walk into walls or fall over. When she sat up in her chair at night, I would have to literally hold her up in her chair next to me so she wouldn't slide out and fall onto the floor because she was so intoxicated. And I saw this person that really needed somebody to help her. Nobody saw Amy. Everybody saw a mother god. And I guess that's what made me a little bit different is, whether I can't explain what part of me wanted to be there and to help and support Amy and the person who was hurting underneath, that I could see she had trauma that she was running from, that she didn't want to talk about. She would tell these stories and she would go from crying to anger to laughing. And you could tell there was things from her past that really bothered her that she never dealt with. And, part of me just really felt for her. And I had grown to care about her very much. I mean, we slept in the same bed together. We had grown very close over the 9-10 months that I was with the team. But at the same time, I made a difference between the real person underneath and this mother god persona who I felt was just a defense mechanism she created so she could pretend to be somebody that she wasn't, so she didn't have to deal with or look at the things that were really bothering her from her past. And I made the difference between the two. And whether it was a coping mechanism or it was just how I went on, that is how I approached this situation, because I did every day spend the day kind of dismantling the illusions, the delusions, the things she would say. I would, clap back at her and essentially say, well, explain this to me. And I would ask her questions that she didn't want to answer, and she would yell and say, you're in your ego, leave it alone, just go away. And I would explain to her, like, well, look, you won't answer these questions, so obviously there's something there, and I just want you to recognize that. And then I'd let it go. But I would fight with her on a daily basis. But I would still serve the human being like any human being deserves to be loved. I mean, we all have issues, but we all still deserve to be loved we all still deserve to be cared for. We're never so far lost that we don't deserve, somebody to truly care for us. And I recognize that nobody else saw anything but Mother God. And me, because of how close I was to her, I saw Amy. I saw Mother God too. And I made the difference between the two. And that's how I kind of went along in my 9 months there. And as time went on, I grew more and more, I guess, emboldened in speaking out against the delusions and the Mother God persona while never giving up on Amy herself. I was trying to snap her out of it. I almost had her a couple times. She admitted she wasn't Mother God, and I thought I was going to be able to save her and end this all, end the delusion. You can still do this. You can still help the world, but you don't need to be Mother God to do it. That was my message. And I thought it was going to get home, and it never did, unfortunately. But that's what I was fighting for.
Do you think that the world, for that matter, and the media that have told his story have portrayed Amy properly? Do you think the story has been told properly?
I don't think the whole story has been told. I think the media has done with what the media will do, and they've told the sensational parts of the story, the parts of this story that sell, to the parts of this story that people were probably most interested in, the parts of the story that will get your attention. But no, I don't believe Amy has been humanized in a way that she, I don't know if you want to say deserves to be humanized, but maybe she does. But yeah, there was a human being there that I don't think has really been talked about very often because maybe it's not as important. People are so interested to hear about that stuff because it just sounds like every other story of somebody who had things to, issues to deal with. They didn't turn into Mother God and start a cult, but she did. So maybe she won't get so much love. But in my place, that's not what I saw. So when people ask me to tell my story, you're going to hear that because that played such a big part of my story.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I don't blame the media I don't think the media has done anything wrong. I just think that, it's easy to miss the human parts of her because of how sensational things had become. And don't get me wrong, by the time 2018 beyond to her passing in 2021, she had become unrecognizable even to me. But back in 2014 and 2015, that she was a completely different person back then. And that person was definitely somebody who was worth saving and somebody who was very human and who was teetering on the edge. And, I provided her a fork in the road. I really did. And she chose to go in the other direction. And that was, in the end, I had to realize that I couldn't save Amy. I couldn't save the cult. I had to settle for being able to just save myself.
You already talked about this a little bit when you said that this persona that she created was like a defense mechanism in order not to look in the mirror of who she really is and to look at reality. So Correct. It was, I think the way you're describing it almost sounds like a fantasy. She created a fantasy for herself, so she doesn't have to be confronted by that which is reality. And you already hinted a couple of times that you tried to snap her out of that fantasy, right? Try to bring her back to the real world, and that you got very close a couple of times. And you also said that you were pretty much on a daily basis in a fight with her. What I'm really curious about, and maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but what I'm really curious about is in the moments that you really try to open her up and connect with her and to approach her as somebody who you genuinely wanted to help, because it really sounds like you wanted that. In those moments, could you bring her to a point that she would give you a window into her past life and what drove her towards creating that Mother God persona? So the underlying question there, in essence, is why did she become Mother God? What were the steps that took her there?
Yeah, that's a great question. She kept it very close to the vest. Even me, it was very hard to get this out of her. There was clearly unresolved, they would say past trauma, but if it's unresolved, it's present because it's still controlling what you do. And it was very clear that that was there. But getting her to open up, even just the two of us, she was not forthcoming with these things. Only when she drank at night, and every night she drank, she would tell stories every night for hours on end. I mean, without stopping to take a breath. She would tell stories of her past life. She would do what I call past polishing. All of the stories that she told of her life, she had woven in the mother god persona of how everything that ever happened to her meant she was always supposed to become mother god. And she would sometimes get close to telling you things that happened, and you could kind of put it together yourself how these things could have, caused her to create these defense mechanisms. But you could tell there were things there that she wasn't saying, things that she would stop, and she wouldn't go any further, and she would change the subject, or she would just, wave her hand and say, never mind. And she would stop, and you would realize, okay, there is something here where she doesn't want to talk about. And no, I couldn't. Even I couldn't get those things out of her. And I do know a little bit, but, all I can say is that, yeah, it was some trauma that had been not dealt with. And I do believe that this mother god persona was a way for her to protect herself or convince herself that she had moved beyond it, because the mother god persona was egoless. It was perfect. It had no issues whatsoever. She would tell you this, yes, I am perfect. And I think she needed to believe that as a coping mechanism for what she had been through, because she had never truly dealt with it.
Right.
But even I couldn't get it out of her. Even in the moments when she said, you know what, Andrew, you're right. I don't think I am Mother God. I still couldn't get what it was that was kind of creating the fantasy. I couldn't get it out of her, even though I could get her to see through the cracks at times. Unfortunately, I was always fighting against Michael or Miguel Lamboy, because she would spend 5 minutes with him and he would reel her right back in. Don't listen to Andrew. He's trying to disrupt and destroy everything we're doing here. He's trying to, destroy everything we've created. Don't listen to him. You are Mother God. And it was more him that I was fighting in a proxy war than her. But if it weren't for him, I was pretty sure that I would have snapped her out of it. Unfortunately, that wasn't the way that it was gonna go.
Yeah, and this Michael character, or Miguel Lamboy, he seems kind of to be the like a hidden player in the background that you don't really hear very much about, because when you look for Amy Carlson, when you look for, The Love Is One Girl, you will find Amy Carlson, but not very much Michael Lamboy, although he is on the Wikipedia page. But it's a very interesting character because, for as far as I can tell, he had... Okay, so what you just said is super interesting. And let me tell you why. Because in the research that I did for this conversation, he popped up as one of the two, or as the first member that Carlson recruited officially. So the very first member. And he became kind of like the treasurer, right? The person in charge of the finances. So he was also then the person, I think, that when you said people, liquidated their 401ks and donated everything, that he was the person that was receiving that pretty much for the organization. And let me skip forward all the way to the end, because when Amy Carlson died in 2021, I believe not even a couple of weeks later, Miguel Lamboy was nowhere to be found. And he drained the bank account of the cult of Love Has Won. And that came to the account, I believe, of $330,000. It was gone, and he was nowhere to be found. Not by the members, but also not by
Shocking.
media. Right. So the reason why I'm saying it's very interesting what you're saying is because he seems to be this person in the background who is steering Amy in such a way that that Amy is kind of like the person at the front, right? She is the person that you see if you look at this organization, while he is trying to maintain the integrity of it, if that makes sense. What do you think?
Michael is the hidden hand. His name was on everything that was legal facing, whether it be a website creation, a bank account, or credit card, the rent, the rental agreements of the houses, everything was in his name. Even in 2014, all of the team members would laugh that Michael was going to one day just take it all and walk away. You also
Which
have
he
to look
did.
at the also have to look at the fact that Amy withered away and died on a slow basis and was never given medical care.
Yeah.
Why is that? And I speak to Amy's family often, and these questions aren't isolated. Let's just say that they're not isolated. Why she didn't get the help that she needed, I put it on him because he was there the whole time. He was there from before I even joined, all the way to the end. And it makes you really wonder, especially considering the fact that I was fighting him to snap her out of it. It wasn't even her I was really fighting, it was him. I actually left the cult after 9 months, and she decided a couple weeks later to leave the cult and follow me across the country. This isn't known by many people, and she left the cult behind. One of my requirements for her coming to live with me was that she leave it all behind, including Michael, and cut ties. And I acknowledged that it was wrong for me to require that of her. But I had told her straight up that I had moved on with my life. I intended to move in a different direction. And I didn't believe that she could move in a new direction unless she had cut ties with Michael. And she promised me that she would cut ties with him and she would move in a new direction. After a couple months, she did come across the country. She left the whole cult behind. This is in 2015. After a few months, I realized she had never cut ties with Michael. And, I had feelings that she hadn't. And we eventually split up and ended things. And she went and rebuilt the cult, rebranded it. Love Has Won. But Michael was the hidden hand the entire time. And there are a lot of questions there. And he was smart. If you also know that he was the person who reported the mummified remains to the Sequatchie County Police Department or Sheriff's Department before the raid happened on the house when they found Amy's mummified remains. It was Michael who went to the police and reported Amy's mummified body being there. And he was smart enough to get ahead of the situation and to go and report it. And I wasn't there at the time, so I can't say what he did know or what did happen or for sure. But what I know is Amy trusted nobody more than she trusted Michael. And there's no way he didn't know what was going on with what was happening with the team. And there are a lot of unanswered questions about his role and his lack of getting her medical care and then disappearing with the money. When you look at it, when you zoom out and look at the big picture, it raises a lot of very serious questions, and whether or not they ever get answered is another story. But you could write a book on that alone.
Now, once again, with the gift of hindsight, how would you describe Michael as a person?
Like any human, he had his endearing moments. But, he had a very calm, cool, collected vibe to him. Almost too cool. Very soft-spoken. Very well thought out type of person. And when he wanted to talk to you, he had his mind made up. And, he spoke like this. And it just always felt very cold, very calculated, very inauthentic. He had, in some moments, when he was being endearing, almost like a childlike personality sometimes. He could be funny. But more often than not, he saw himself as the team manager. He would report every morning. He would come into Amy and I, afternoon, because we didn't go to bed till 7 o'clock in the morning when Amy was finished drinking. But he would come into our bedroom. He would knock on the door and he would come in, and every day would start with Michael reporting to us on the state of the team members. And he would watch all of the team members and report on their egos or their baggage or their trauma, their white programming, how one of them's eating too much, how one of them hasn't cut off their family yet. And he would report all this to Amy, and he saw himself as kind of like the team manager, and he oversaw all of the members of the team. Amy leaned on him and trusted him for advice more than anyone. And that's who Michael was. He was her lieutenant. As far as running the team and being in charge, if it wasn't Amy, it was Michael. And, as far as, legally speaking, having his name on everything, he was, legally speaking, the one in charge.
How did he treat you? How did he approach you? You already mentioned a certain coldness and a sort of inauthenticness in his voice. But what was your relationship, your personal relationship like with him?
Sure. So there was a mutual respect there because of where I was in the hierarchy as Amy's partner. He respected that because he couldn't fight that. The fact that I was Amy's partner was not something he could fight. So he gave way to that. But Michael and I butted heads quite often. We didn't see things from the same angle. When I was fighting against the mother god persona, it was Michael who was, trying to, fight back against me. Amy wouldn't fight back as much. Michael would try to. And when I would, talk to him, I'd try to whittle down the conversation. When you're talking to somebody about a topic, you would go back and forth enough times that you eventually get to the core of the topic. And every time we ever got to the core of the topic, when I was confronting them about how this was all delusional, Michael couldn't ever give me an example. He couldn't ever explain. His answer would be, "Oh, you're in your ego. That's it." Whenever we got down to the crux of the matter, it was just, "You're in your ego," and he would either walk away or just stop talking. We butt heads every day. So there was always that conflicting. We always conflicted, and it was like me and him were in a proxy war over Amy, is what it really was. When I was trying to snap her out of it, it was like Michael and I were in a proxy war, and it was really him I was fighting, not her.
Let's take stock of the situation now, because you've painted a pretty clear picture. So it seems that Amy was her real self in the morning when she woke up, and in some situations with her you could do that connecting, right, on a human level. But then she put on that armor again, that persona of being Mother God. And she had also her followers, the members of her organization, of the cult, around her at all times, because they were living together with her. And every single day, Michael would come in to report, to communicate, and to make sure that Amy stayed on the track that he wanted her to be on. You said already a couple of times that you were caring about the person Amy, but that you had resistance towards the personified Mother God Amy. Did you feel like you were alone with that? So another way of asking it is, how did the other members approach Amy or talk about Amy as Mother God? How was that persona? How serious was that persona Mother God? How much weight did it carry?
It carried as much weight as it needed to within the team, for sure. All of the members, like I'd mentioned, it was easier to just play along. Everything got to a point where when you find yourself in that environment, isolated in that environment, it's easier to just play along rather than put a target on your own back and fight back against the team. Most of these people have had their wallets washed in the sense that they don't have money. They've given it all to the team. They don't have the means to go back home hundreds of miles away, get a flight, get transportation to go back home. Most of them have been isolated from their family as well. Leaving the team isn't so easy for a lot of these people. So again, those control mechanisms are almost baked into the environment itself. So they go along to get along. Amy was the leader. People followed what she said, but she had to rebuild the team after I left because what I had done in fighting against the Mother God persona day after day after day with I chose my battles, but I was given so much material to work with that by the time I left, so did the other team members because I had essentially exposed the delusion for what it was. And everybody left after I did, pretty much.
What did you do?
There was so many opportunities to show her to herself like a mirror. For instance, we had one team member who pretended to be these fake alien beings in our chat room. He made an elaborate deception that I call the quantum hoax, which is in my book, The War on Love. I get into it. He made this big hoax where he pretended to be these beings that had this cosmic knowledge and this knowledge of our team, and he knew things that were impossible for somebody who wasn't there to know, and convinced Amy that these beings were sent from another galaxy to her to help her awaken humanity. She really believed this. And over the course of a couple months, they elevated this one team member. They elevated his status to a healer. He took advantage of Amy sexually. So Amy told me. He claimed otherwise afterwards, but from what Amy told me, he very much did. He used it to elevate his status. I even have the receipts. The transcripts are in my book as well because I saved them when I started to realize that he was running this elaborate deception, controlling Amy, controlling the team. Her guides said that this was all real. I figured it out, that it was fake, that it was him the whole time. I confronted him and exposed it all. Exposed Amy's guides, and everything is being fake. For months, Amy had been following them, saying they were real. Her guides confirmed they were real. And I used this to show her and say, look, your guides that you say are real all believed this was real, but this was exposed as a fraud. So how come your guides are real? How could your guides be real? How could all of this guidance that you say you get be real? How could your Mother God persona be real if this hoax was played against you and you didn't even know it? And I would use that. It was a big one. I would use examples of this to show her to herself and say, look, this isn't real. You are conflating what you want to believe to be true and what reality actually is. You have taken what you want to be true and you have made that your reality, when instead you have not put a difference between what your belief is and what the truth is. And every day, and drinking was another thing. You claim to be perfect and egoless, yet you're an alcoholic. So you obviously have emotions that you haven't dealt with. You have trauma from your past that you haven't dealt with, but you claim to have no ego and to be perfect. These things don't match. I would confront her with all of this on a daily basis, and there was no lack of opportunity. Again, I had to choose my battles. there was no lack of opportunity. And this is what I would do on a daily basis, was essentially just hold a mirror up to her and show her to herself and say, you are not perfect. You are not egoless. You are not God. These titles are all fake. What do you have to say for yourself? And I would get no response. Just, you're in your ego, Andrew, that's it. That would be the response. There was no discussion to be had. There was no, let's talk about this, let's whittle it down and get to the core, because there was none. It was all fake. And that's what I did on a daily basis, was just really work to dismantle it and snap her out of this delusion.
Mm-hmm.
And the other team members, it was easier for them to snap out of it. Obviously, it was a little bit harder for her to snap out of it.
This entire situation feels like on every single side that you look at it, there's a lot of pain and suffering involved for everybody involved. So in 2020, which was around 6-7 months before she passed away, because she passed away in April 2021. In September of 2020, she went on Dr. Phil together with a couple of her family members and a couple of her followers. And in that show, which was spread over 2 days, so 2 hours in total, I believe, a lot of things came forward. So there's a couple of things I want to throw at you, just to see what you think about that. Because on one end, I'm really curious, and let's start there maybe. I'm really curious about her followers, because you said a little bit earlier, like the easiest thing to go through your day was to go along with the story, to go along with that persona, because that was the thing that was accepted within that cult. But in that, for example, in that Dr. Phil episode, there were 2 young ladies coming forward, and I don't know how old they are, but they looked like they were in their early 20s or something along those lines. It didn't seem to me, I didn't get the sense that they were just going along. They were quite adamant with their statements when saying things like, when answering the question, what does Mother God mean to you? The answer was pretty straightforward. She means everything to me, right? I owe everything to her. She is my life, and I will do whatever I can to serve her. That doesn't sound like just going along to me. That sounds like complete submission to almost to a deity, to a higher divine being, something that someone might do in a religious sense to God, let's say. Was that already the case? Did it already reach that level when you were still there?
No, it didn't. Although I should say, if the video cameras were rolling, it was different than if they weren't.
Okay.
There was always a sense of putting your best foot forward in front of the cameras, especially when it came to Amy. And that's something that I saw change for her over time. That's something that changed as time went on. The years after I left, she got a lot more lax about what she allowed to be shown on camera. I mean, even to the point where she was holding a cat out by the scruff of its neck. A cat that actually had belonged to me. If you've seen that video, there's actually a cat that I adopted. I couldn't believe that these things made it onto television. And that was another thing that I would use against her when she abused one of the animals like that. I would use that against her. But when it came to people believing, it became a lot more serious as time went on. And I don't know where it really started, but, I know for sure Michael and Amy would have wanted to make sure they never had another version of me on the team ever again, because they surely would not have wanted somebody who worked every day to dismantle the delusion. They probably would have kicked that person out as quickly as possible. At some point, they became a little bit more militant, and their believers became, true believers in a much stronger sense, in a much different way than we were back in 2014, 2015. It felt a lot looser, a lot more laid back. than it looked like in 2020, in 2021, and the level of belief that I saw coming from
Yeah.
these people, 8 of them sitting around, just talking about how they've disgraced mother and disrespected mother, going around the horn and just all talking about how badly they've treated her, and just coming up with the most insane things I had ever heard, talking about how badly they've treated her. And it made me realize how far they had fallen. And I can't really explain why the belief had become so strong in the way that it did, but it was not the same as it was when I was there.
There's so much darkness if you look into it. That's that scene with your cat being held like that. That was incredibly painful to watch. But also that other video that was shown in that same Dr. Phil episode was the one with the kid being locked up in the closet multiple times in a row. And Amy called that timeout. Every kid goes to timeout. But this was a kid being thrown in the darkness in a closet a couple of times in a row, crying and screaming for his life pretty much. It's that. And with 5 adults in the room, not doing anything about it.
Painful, yes, and that's where the danger comes in. That's where things start to get really dangerous. When there's nobody with the courage to speak out. They've all been isolated from their own authenticity. I'm sure at least 1 or 2 of the people in that room felt to themselves, well, this is probably not right. It was probably the person who eventually got the kid out of the closet and went and grabbed him and picked him up. That was probably the first person who thought to themselves, well, maybe this isn't right. But they weren't courageous or strong enough to stand up to Amy or Mother God and say, no, this isn't right. We're not even going to do this. I'm letting this child out of this room. Or how could you grab this cat like this? Like, let this cat down right now and stop her from it. It's scary. It's hard for me to even consider how far they could have fallen down. And when I try to think about it and explain it, what I come up with was that in 2015, I had offered her a choice, a fork in the road, and I offered her truth and letting go of the delusion, or the opposite, which was more darkness, more lies, more delusion, going deeper into that hole. And 5 or 6 years later, it just continued to spiral down and get worse and worse and worse until it was so destructive and so painful and so dangerous that it was completely unrecognizable. Because when I turn on the videos or when I look, I still haven't watched the 3rd part of the HBO series in completion, because it is so hard for me to watch some of that, because it had just gone so far from what I had known. And it really made me understand what I was fighting for, fighting against, and that I had seen what I was worried about would happen did eventually come to pass. Worse than I thought it even would be.
Do you think your resistance towards the Mother God persona had any success? Did it do anything good, you think?
I think it probably made it worse, because it forced her, almost like I was a catalyst that forced her to go in the opposite direction even harder than she would have if I didn't push her so hard. And I might be completely wrong about that. It probably might have ended up that way anyway. But the energy and the force with which I fought against her on a daily basis, the reaction and every action has a reaction. The reaction from my action, I would think, would be so opposite that it would have been very bad and very problematic. And sometimes I wonder if I haven't had really spent so much energy trying to dismantle and destroy that delusion, if it wouldn't have turned so militant. Why did they need the rules? Why did they need to be on top of and so controlling of the new members? Was it because they wanted to make sure there was not another Andrew ever again? Or because if there was no me in the first place, would they have needed those roles? Or would they have even recognized that they needed to make sure there was nobody else who ever spoke out like I did ever again? That's what I think about. And it may be true, it may not. But it makes me think that talking about her or to her and really dismantling with the amount of energy that I tried to might have forced them to really go in the opposite direction harder than they would have if I hadn't tried.
Do you blame yourself?
I don't blame myself. I don't blame myself because I recognize that, one, I'm human, and in that moment I was doing a good thing. I was really doing what I thought was best. I don't blame myself for Amy holding a kitten up by the scruff of its neck. I don't blame myself for them mocking a child in a room. I don't blame myself for a bunch of people who joined and decided to give up their own individuality, to give up their own authenticity, and to completely submit to Mother God. No, I don't blame myself for that. Life is hard enough as it is, without finding new, interesting, creative ways to make life harder for yourself. And that's not something that I'm going to be doing for myself for sure. I've had my own crucibles to go through, and no, I don't blame myself. I blame the people who were there and the people who made those decisions.
You left the group after 9 or 10 months. How easy was it to leave? What are the consequences for people that want to leave? And how did that last day went for you?
Yeah, so for most people, the consequences of leaving are difficult, like I mentioned, because you've been isolated from your family. So now going back to them, you're kind of, in one way, you're tucking tail and going back. So there's a little bit of resistance there because nobody wants to have to do that. There's also, sometimes there's been problems created between you and your family that you have to go back to, that people are looking forward to. Then people have had their wallet washed, as I say it, in the sense that they don't have money to go back. And, now somebody looks at, you got a freeloader coming back, and who wants a freeloader coming to their house? Somebody that has to rebuild and put it all together, so it can be very difficult for people who are leaving. But most of the people who saw through the delusion, that moment, they would just pack their stuff up and they'd leave right away because they had nothing else to stay for. This is crazy. I'm gone. Me, I had Amy and I stayed for her. And what caused me to leave was, obviously, after fighting against the delusion and railing against it every day, I couldn't be Father God anymore, right? Obviously, Andrew wasn't going to be Father God. He's no longer a believer. So somebody else had to come in and take the role. And Amy, the new Father God was just the next guy she was attracted to. That's really all it ever was. And I had to watch her, and I had to essentially watch myself lose her right in front of me. And, she told me that while we were going to have a new Father God, that she wanted to continue our relationship. But, at night she'd be drinking, snuggling up to this new Father God right in front of me. Or she'd leave one day and not come back until the next day. They'd go rent a hotel room, and then they'd come back the next day. And like everything is okay, and I'd just have to let it go and not make a big deal. Yes, I was super jealous about it, of course. That was the position I was in. But I didn't want to make a big deal out of it at the same time. So I just found myself in a place where the experience I began to have was not one that I wanted anymore. While it was tough enough to fight against the delusion and be in an environment I didn't believe in, it was another thing entirely to watch myself have to lose the woman I cared about right in front of my own eyes. It's like breaking up with your girlfriend and then having to, watch her go get her new boyfriend. And that was tough for me. And that was just like, that took things beyond the limit of what I wanted to experience. And that's what actually pushed me over the edge and made me decide it was time to leave. And when I left in love. I gave hugs to everybody. I was honest about why I was leaving. I didn't want to experience this. You're fine to go in your own direction, Amy. You can have a relationship with anybody you want. You're an adult, but I'm going to make my choice to take myself, my dog Lincoln, and, I'm going to go make a life for myself. Obviously, I don't believe in, the mother God thing. I don't believe in what we're doing here anymore. So I'm going to leave. And that's why I left. She eventually, like I said, weeks later followed me, but and it didn't work out in the long run. But that is why I left, was because I didn't want to watch her and losing her to another person. That was too hard. That was a little too hard.
That new person that you said that she was getting engaged with.
Oh yeah.
Was that Jason Castillo?
No. So he came much later. The person that I'm speaking of is the person who donated his 401k, liquidated his 401k, sold his home, have the bank come up with all the money, and donated it all in cash to Amy. It was about $420,000 at that point in time. And that was the new father God. That he did that because she told him that, that was how he was going to get rid of his ego. And that by doing that, he was going to be able to get rid of his ego and make room for Father God's consciousness to download into him. And I did everything I could to snap him out of it before it happened. I gave him, just like I railed against Amy's or the Mother God persona, I would pull him aside and I would explain to him how this is all delusional, how he's going to give up his money and then months later he's going to be left with nothing. He's going to eventually leave with nothing. I explained this all to him, but it was like talking to the happiest brick wall in all of creation. He didn't want to hear it. He thanked me, but he was happy. He wanted to donate everything to love, to Amy, and there was nothing I could do. And unfortunately, he ended up leaving the team just a couple months after Amy left the team behind and came and joined me across the country. And I'm sorry to say I learned not too long ago that after that happened, or after Amy passed away in 2021, he died unexpectedly, suddenly. And it was really sad. Nobody saw it coming, but he just passed away. And I don't have the details, but I feel really bad about it. I felt sorry for him, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. And that was one of the more difficult things that I had to witness and to see, knowing what was going to happen to him. Because when he joined, it was like me when I first joined, wide-eyed and wanting to believe everything. And I tried to give him the shortcut to waking up, and it didn't work. He didn't want to hear it. And I go into that more in my book, The War on Love. And that's why I call it The War on Love, is because she considered herself love. And it was like I was fighting for what love really was. And I was fighting against what she thought her definition of it was. She had things so twisted and turned, and she had some people so twisted and turned. It was really sad, and in some parts it was shocking. And 6 years later, to see what it devolved into, it still takes my breath away. It leaves me speechless in some moments.
Yeah, let's talk about that and about 2021 in just a little bit. But I do have a question that popped into my mind while you were talking. That when you mentioned that the concept of love has been so twisted and mangled in this experience. And even though, from a timeline perspective, even though your time there was relatively short, 10 months, it made a huge impact, which is very clear and which comes forward in this entire conversation with you, with everything that you're saying. So when we are talking about the concept of love, do you feel like the meaning behind that word with it, because of this experience, has changed for you? If I ask you point blank the question, what does love mean for you? What does it symbolize for you? What would your answer right now be?
unconditional. Without the word unconditional in front of it, to me, it doesn't exist. It has to be unconditional or it isn't love. In the sense that, in the way that I loved Amy, it was unconditional. I saw beyond the mother God persona. I saw beyond the alcohol, and there was a person in there that was fantastic. Somebody I cared about very much. And when it comes to my other family members, to myself even, love to me is, an unconditional care for a person because you realize that they deserve it, that you can offer them yourself in wholeness, in authenticity, in balance, in support, in ways that they might need from you or ways that you can offer. And, love can be shown in so many different ways. But the one thing that I learned about it is that if it isn't unconditional, it isn't love. And that's what really Amy taught me, even though she didn't necessarily mean to. What I learned from that whole situation was to love myself unconditionally, was to love her unconditionally. Despite so many reasons I was given to the opposite. Unconditional care, unconditional love. That's what I consider to be love.
How about trust? What does trust mean to you? How do you build trust?
Authenticity. That is one of the biggest lessons that I took from my time with the team is people standing in their authenticity, not needing to hide parts of yourself because you're worried about your image or you're worried about blowback or, consequences for being yourself. Trust to me is when somebody is authentic with you. And I think trust can come in different forms. In the same way I trust my boss to write my checks for me every week that I show up to work. I don't necessarily trust him to watch my dog or to babysit my niece or my nephew. There's different layers and levels of what trust can be. But, depending on what kind of trust we're talking about, I think there's a layer of authenticity that needs to be present that you can expect from the other person. That's what I believe real trust is.
Yeah, and it also sounds like faith, that you have faith in a certain result, right? That you have faith that certain things happen, that your boss writes the check and that your dog will be waiting at home when you walk in the door. Yeah, like you said, it's very selective.
Yeah. I think faith is a good word to throw in there too. Trust in faith. I don't think those two things are very separate from each other. I think they intertwine very much for sure. I think that's a great point.
All right, so let's just do a small little recap before we go to that last chapter in that story.
Sure.
So to recap, in 2014, you joined. Back then, it was not Love Has Won yet. It got rebranded in 2015. And over the lifespan of the organization, so with Amy Carlson as Mother God, there were in total 4 Father Gods, of which you were one. You left after 9 or 10 months, and you did so in 2015. And then if we fast forward with 6 years to 2021, to April 2021 to be specific, Amy died. Earlier in September of 2020, on that interview with Dr. Phil, she said she had stage 5 cancer, which I believe is not a thing. It doesn't go higher than stage 4, but she described it as cancer having been spread to her bones. In the autopsy report, there was no report of cancer being there.
Right.
You said earlier that she was withering away.
Correct.
And I believe in the autopsy report there was a couple of things happening, but one of the things that happened was that she was ingesting a medical form of silver, which that cult has put forward as like the cure to COVID-19. So she had an overdose of that, I suppose, or something like that. She had a large amount in her body with that, which contributed to her death. So that was in April.
Yes.
And then a very strange thing happened, because in the weeks leading up to her death, there was regular check-ins, I believe from the police, to her house to see if she was okay. And they were rejected at the door by members of Love Has Won. You don't need to help. We don't need you here. Something along those lines. And they went away. And that ties together with what you said earlier, I think, when you said that Michael didn't want any help in the end to come over. It kind of, when I was reading this, it gave me the idea that even though Amy, as Mother God, was this central figure that was, God itself, right? The creator of the universe. They let her die. They didn't intervene. They didn't do what was needed in order to get her the proper medical attention. Help was rejected. And then a couple of weeks later, she actually died. And a couple of weeks after that, 7 arrests happened. Because members of the organization were arrested for mummifying her body. They were arrested and charged with a couple of things. A couple of things also were thrown out by the judge, I believe. But one of it was messing around with a human corpse.
Abuse of a corpse, yeah.
And they found her in a very weird state. They found her... So I will not go into too much detail, but they found her wrapped up pretty much in a blanket with some form of Christmas light around her in a mummified shape. Very bluish, purplish skin, which apparently is a side effect of that medical form of silver that she was taking.
Silver. That's right.
Yeah. It looked very weird. So let me just go back to you. This whole scenario, reading it, is insane. It blew my mind when I was reading it. When did you first hear about this? How did you hear about this? And what went through your mind?
I was working as an internet manager at a car dealership here in Tennessee. I received a phone call from, I believe it was Fox Denver. And I answered the phone and I said, hello. And they said, hi, is this Andrew? I said, yes. They said, is this the Andrew that was involved in Love Has Won? First thing I wanted to do was hang up the phone. And I was curious. I said, yes, it's that Andrew. How can I help you? They said, well, we just wanted to know if you would like to make a comment on the recent developments with the cult. And I said, you'll have to forgive me. I don't follow them at all. I don't know what happened. And it was actually the person on the other line from, I believe it was Fox Denver or one of the local Denver news stations, who told me what happened, that Amy had been found mummified, the house was raided, that she had died. I knew she was in bad health. I was not surprised, but I was shocked. There's this twisting of emotions there because, I wasn't surprised because I could see, the fork in the road from years earlier, how things were going to get worse and worse and worse because she had chosen the road she had chosen. But still, it was shocking to hear that her members had let her wither away and die and refused her medical care. That I couldn't believe. That was shocking to me because when I was there, our team members, the first thing we would have done was gotten her help. I mean, that's what you do when a human being is suffering, is you get them help, right? I mean, what else do you do? You help them. Who wants to see a human being suffer for any reason? It didn't process. It wasn't until I wrote my book, The War on Love, that it began to process. It didn't hit me at first. I did the interview. They asked me if, I would answer some questions on the phone. And then they said, well, you obviously know your stuff. Can we do a video interview with you? I said, yes, I did a video interview with them, but it never really hit me. I was so surprised and I was in such shock from what I heard that, I didn't really feel anything other than this disbelief. It wasn't until I began writing my book from a dispassionate place, when the world was quiet, when I really had to relive the experiences, when I really had to think about her and what she was going through. That's when I really began to process the emotions. And they were really difficult. It was hard. To say that I'm past it would be a lie. I get angry when I think about it. Her withering away for months on end and nobody getting her help. The girls on YouTube even bragged on a YouTube video about how she had a moment where she asked for help and they told her, no, your mother, God, we can't take you to a hospital. We're not taking you to a doctor. They bragged about a moment when she said, what if I just made this all up? What if I am crazy? Finally, she was breaking through it, begging, this is Amy coming out, begging for help. And they tell her, no, your mother, God, this is nonsense. Don't believe it. And they just spin her right back into the delusion. And they don't want to hear it. And she withers away and dies. To wrap it all up, I would say I'm pretty angry about it. Because I believe she was mistreated. I believe that any human being that asks for help who isn't capable of getting the help themselves, that you are legally or should be legally bound to help that person, regardless of whether you want to or not. If they can't get help themselves, but they ask for it and it's clear they need it, I think it's your responsibility to get it for them. And the fact that it didn't really, I'm still pretty angry about it. I'd say that's where I'm at right now, is I'm still pretty angry.
How do you deal with that? Because it seemed... Okay, so from my perspective, right? And we've had a conversation now for around an hour, 1.5 hours now. What I'm hearing and who I'm seeing is a person who is is in conflict between two different ideas, right? The idea of Mother God and what that God has done is wrong. And the influence that they had on the people that were engaged with them and their families around them and everything else that they touched was wrong. And things that happened in there were also wrong. You're pretty clear about that. But what I'm also hearing is a person who has the ability to look under a person, into a persona, and to see what is the human that is under there, right? And you saw that person, and you saw Amy, the real Amy, the human Amy. So your struggle makes sense, right? The struggle that you entered that organization and that you connected with Amy on a human level, and that when you woke up in the morning and you had your coffee, right, that you had these conversations with her before she put the persona on, and that you were still having this feeling of caring for her even when you left, which was true also later when you connected with her a couple of weeks when she followed you. And yes, that broke off again, but it happened, right? That connection was still there. And even now, when you're talking about what happened in the last stage of her life, it makes you angry. She should have gotten the help that she needed, right? You are approaching this from a couple of different perspectives. And that makes it very human. So it's kind of a silly question to ask, but in your mind, what is the help that Amy should have gotten? And when?
Yeah, great question. Now you're really getting to the heart of it, I think. The help that she really needed was here in her heart, but here in her head. That was the help that she needed, and she needed it as early as 2014, from the first day that I met her. That's when she needed it. She needed it earlier than then. She needed it much earlier than then, obviously, based on what I learned about her and the stories that she would tell from the years of past that were still with her, emotions that she carried with her into the present. Just like I said, there's no such thing as unresolved past trauma. It's always unresolved present trauma because it's still with you. And, that's where I think she should have gotten help. And if I can say one thing that might sound a little bit radical to some of your listeners, or to you in a sense, while I do believe she had done a lot wrong, there's also the notion of all of these adults making their choices to be in this situation. So I try not to define so much as right and wrong. I try to take the transient information out of it. It is what it is. I just try to understand what was happening. And while I don't believe it was right, part of me almost doesn't want to say, she was wrong, because she believed, at least in the moments that I was with her, she was doing the right thing. She was somebody who needed help that never got it. And I think, in some ways, the world and her family, or not to put it on them, or other people around her, failed her as well. And she deserves a lot of, I don't want to say blame, but the credit for her actions are certainly on her. But at the same time, she was somebody who was hurting, who needed help and never got it. You're 100% right to say that there's a mix of emotions and a mix of angles and a mix of feelings there for me, because there's so many different ways. So I do want to say that her actions weren't right, and I do want to say that she was wrong, and then part of me doesn't want to call it wrong. Part of me wants to almost say that it was somebody who needed help that didn't get it. It was avoidable. It's a tragic tale is what it really is. In the end, it's a cautionary, tragic tale of mental health and what happens and what can potentially happen when people don't have the resources or the support or even the unconditional love that they really do need.
Let me ask you a question from that somebody who would have a skeptical perspective might ask.
Sure.
Or maybe even a cynical perspective. Because one that doesn't look very deep into the nuances of the story, and that doesn't hear the different stories of the different people that were engaged in this, they might come to the conclusion Amy ran a cult. She had a bunch of members that sacrificed everything, both financial, in freedom, in opportunity, in all sorts of different ways, in family, in everything, to be there and to serve her. Amy let that happen. She motivated it. So a person looking at it from that standpoint might say, sure, things might have happened to Amy that caused her to be this way. A lack of help, or a lack of understanding, or a lack of meaning, or whatever it may have been. Something that you have been trying to get to the bottom of with her. But now she has made the choice to be... It's a heavy word to use, but I'm going to use it anyway. To be a perpetrator, right? To engage these people, to let them sacrifice their lives. So then, if you ask yourself the moral question, is Amy a victim or a perpetrator, which I perfectly understand. There's a whole lot of nuance in that question. I completely get that. But one might come to the conclusion that it's the perpetrator side and not the victim side anymore. The victim side has been in the past, right? Now decisions have been made that made her do these things. So to a person taking that perspective and bringing that forward in that frame, what would you say to that person?
I would say they're 100% correct. That's the thing. There's no one right answer to any of this. I believe all perpetrators, or if we can use the term victimizers, are also victims. People who are victims also become victimizers or perpetrators. These words are straight from Amy's mouth. You can't be a victim without being a victimizer, is what she would say. And this, I find that to be so true. And I know people look at this story and they say, well, she did this all to herself. The reason that she didn't get help was because her own teachings were to tell her followers that she couldn't be brought to a hospital, because if they did, the cabal would assassinate her if they could get their hands on her. So that's why she couldn't ever go to a hospital or a doctor's office. It was actually her own teaching that came full circle and was the reason why they didn't get her help. So it was kind of her fault in the first place. So people who have that view are totally correct, but it doesn't mean that's the only view. There's no one answer, and that's what makes tales like this, I think, so tragic and so hard to define, and also so interesting, is because they're hard to really narrow down and put a fine point on, because there are so many moving parts, if you will, that it's hard to really explain and pin it down. I don't think those people are wrong for those beliefs at all. On a superficial level, they're totally correct. Whereas I believe, if you wanted to dig deeper, you could be correct on different levels with a completely, opposing viewpoint. You can make a great case for. Where the truth is, I don't know if I'm the one to say. All I can give is my experience and do my best in a conversation like this to deduce what is actuality. But to be able to plant my flag and say, this is what happened, I have the truth, I know the story, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm just here to explain what I can and, ponder what I can't, I guess.
Let me ask you a personal question, Andrew. And again, if you don't want to answer this one, just let me know. It's totally fine.
Everything's on the table. No worries. I appreciate it, though.
If there is something that you could say to Amy at this moment, and she could still hear it, what would that be?
Wow. I would thank her for all that I've learned and all that I've grown through the experience that I had with her. I would thank her. Whether she meant to teach me things or not, the things that she meant to instill in me and the things that she didn't, I'm grateful for. That experience taught me so much about myself, about the value of authenticity, about the value of truth, about the value of being honorable in ways that nobody else in no other situation, I believe, could have taught me to such a great extent. I would thank her, and I would leave it at that.
All right. Andrew, this is quite a story. And again, even though, and we've already touched upon this a couple of times, but even though your direct involvement only spanned 9 to 10 months, it's very clear that, this moment is highly impactful. Let me skip forward just a little bit, because in 2021 you decided to start speaking out a couple of things happened. You had an interview on Vice, I believe. Dateline also launched a documentary, and there was a 3-part series on HBO, which people can
Correct.
watch right now, called Love Has Won. Why did you want to tell your story? Why did you want to speak out?
Because I felt that I offered an angle or a view, a take on the experience that was unique because of my relationship with Amy and the depth to which I knew her. I felt that I could offer a piece of this story that needed to be told for the whole story to potentially get out there, and also to humanize Amy. But I felt that I also could, by getting past the fear of speaking out or the embarrassment of it, that it might empower others who have been in similar situations to find the strength to speak out for themselves. Because the healing that I found from this experience didn't come from going through it. It came from answering questions like the ones you've asked me today. Because it came from writing my book, The War on Love. Because it wasn't until I went back and started looking at it from a dispassionate point of view that I began to truly process, learn from, and grow from the experience.
Is there a question? So this is my final one. Is there a question that every single time you talk with someone, you wish that they would ask you, but that hasn't been asked yet?
There's not so much, I guess, a question that I wish people would ask as much. If I could have a moment, let's see. I guess it would be, do you think that she purposely brainwashed you? That's a question that I never get asked. And the answer to that is it's a yes and a no. Because it's not that she just, how to say this? It's not like, the word brainwash gets thrown around a lot. And it's not like you woke up one day and, you just thought different than before. But there is this, well, while it started with love bombing, while it started with this name casting, you're going to be Father God, or you're this archangel, there wasn't brainwashing done by her exactly. It was the environment itself. I think that joining the environment, the brainwashing is baked into the environment. And if there's any question that I think I don't ever get asked, it's did Amy intend to brainwash you? And I don't think anybody got brainwashed. I think people brainwashed themselves based on what they were looking for, and they projected their own desire for what they were seeking onto Amy, onto the experience, and then pulled that back out and, in essence, brainwashed themselves. And it's an interesting topic that I never really get asked about very much. And I think about it all the time, and I'm still yet 10 years later to come to a full answer on it. But the environment itself kind of created the brainwashing for you. The seeking the validation, the seeking the acceptance, the seeking the community. feeling trapped or stuck in a life that doesn't make sense. And then you find yourself in a community where they have answers to conspiracy theories, or they have answers to, the spiritual hungers that you have. What it all amounts to is like the perfect environment for you to convince yourself that this is all true, because it serves your own projections of wanting it to be true, so that you can find purpose in this place.
One question came forward just now while you were talking, and that needs to be the absolute last question that I ask you, because this is also what we started the entire conversation with, because you mentioned that the reason why this whole story started for you was because you were looking for meaning, and you didn't have it back then. Do you have it now, Andrew?
Great question. I'm constantly finding it. I'm working every day to find it. I don't know if that's a path or a thing that we ever fully grasp. I think it's something that we seek, and I don't think the seeking ever stops. I think the moment the seeking stops is when you become victim, or potentially victim, to becoming something like what Mother God became.
Andrew, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you.
I'll make sure to also mention your book down below in the description, The War on Love, which is, I believe, a memoir exposing not just love as one, but also your personal journey through that situation, right?
Yeah, it is essentially, I tried to take the beliefs out of it and create more of a chronological record of my experience through my eyes. So it is subjective in that sense, but it's a chronological record of my experience with the cult, with some background that will help you explain why I got pulled in that direction in the first place.
Thank you so much for telling your story. It's, again, from a perspective of someone who has never been engaged or even closely engaged with anything like this, reading about this and seeing what happened and looking at those videos, and it completely blew my mind. And I'm not sure, at least not here in the area where I'm from, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of knowledge on what a cult is. Everybody thinks they know what a cult is, right? It's an organization with people that have all been brainwashed and that follow one leader. And to some degree, that is certainly true in an abstract sense. But it leaves alone the nuance. It leaves alone the reason why people join that to begin with. And it leaves alone a very important piece of nuance, which is that a lot of people need to find meaning. They have this deep yearning for meaning, for a community to belong to, right? And I believe that right now, in the current time, that is a real issue that many people struggle with. So you can almost call it a meaning crisis. People right now are looking for meaning. What is it that we serve aside from ourselves? And that, combined with a belief in conspiracy theories and combined with a whole bunch of other things, opens the door to these kinds of organizations and these kinds of ways to live, which are dangerous and which are destructive, but at the same time, they are not just that, because they do provide an answer, whether you like it or not, right? They do provide that community, and that is attractive to people. So even though it is, from an outsider's perspective, it is an environment that you do not want to be in, I do understand why people move towards it. And I think it's very easy to put it away, to put people that are part of an organization like that away as people that can be easily captured or something along those lines, right? It puts ourselves on a pedestal relative to people that have experienced that. And I think that's a wrong way to think about it, because the story that moves people towards this is a very powerful one. And you could even argue that it is the most powerful one, the most powerful story in our lives, right? The search for meaning. That is incredibly powerful.
Yes.
Yes. So I am really grateful for you shedding light on the process, on the actual way that it works, on how you outgrew it yourself, how it went, and just shedding light on this entire situation. I'm very grateful for you telling that story, Andrew. So thank you very much for that.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. And the way everything you just said, you said very eloquently, and I would mirror those sentiments back. You said it perfectly. The way you just wrapped all those thoughts up, I couldn't have said them better myself. Thank you for letting me be here. It really has been a pleasure. I hope your audience has enjoyed this. I hope some of you find some meaning for yourselves, some inspiration, or some value from my experience and what I've shared here today. And I'm very grateful to have been here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.